Welcome to the Coaching Life podcast. This is Pat Martin. You're hearing my voice on a Monday morning. I'm not talking on a Monday morning, but talking on Sunday evening. But you'll be listening to this on Monday morning, tomorrow morning, for the first time in a while. We're on schedule this week, Coach. Got Coach Stewart with me.
What is our schedule anyway? Because I have in my calendar,
struggle.
I don't know about you, but I have in my calendar Wednesday afternoon podcast recurring meeting.
Somehow we always find something more important to do on that
well, we
Wednesday.
picked the busiest day of the week. I don't know about you, but Wednesday's jam-packed for me. It wasn't that way when we first picked it, I don't think. I think that's what happened. But now Wednesdays are really busy for me.
Well, in this world of
these uncertain times, wait a minute.
I was going to drop this. I was going to go amid this virtual reality that we live in now.
Yeah.
It seems like it's harder for us to abide by that calendar time frame that we have scheduled. Before we were forced, we knew, we had to be there physically. We'd physically relocate to the studio, but now it's just, some other stuff to do.
Yep. It's the way of the world.
Different.
Yep.
Hey, we're coming out of this, I think. May. Oh, goodness, May.
What's May?
May is going to be the end. I'm calling it.
The end of COVID?
Yeah. Well, no, but the end of the fear.
Okay.
I think we're back.
That's a bold prediction, my friend.
I'm making it.
Okay.
I'm not afraid. I've already made a couple that's been wrong though. So everyone out there, don't put your hopes and dreams on Pat Martin's prediction. I am no future teller or anything, but
I hope it's sooner than that.
Yeah, maybe that's it. I'm so pessimistic that I think it's going to be at least until May. So, yeah. But I'm with you. I hope it's sooner than that too. I hope it's tomorrow, but I don't know that that's gonna happen.
Yeah, when you say it like you said it, it may be the end of the fear. I mean, that's your choice. That's everybody's choice, really. So for me, it's been a long time ago. I have not been afraid or in fear of this. Because honestly, I don't pay anything in this world that much respect and fear. I shouldn't say respect. I respect it.
Yeah.
I respect it.
Yeah.
But to fear it is futile. I mean, my life is not in the hands of the government. My life is not in the hands of this virus. My life is not in the hands of anything that this world can throw at you or any circumstance or event. My life is in the hands of the Creator, and that's the only one in whom I fear, truly.
That's a good word there. I think it kind of fits with what we're going to talk about tonight. We're definitely living in a troubling time right now. I would say that. Leave all the cliches and overused phrases aside, I think there's a lot of people that are struggling in life, and I've been kind of compelled to talk a little bit about a topic, and I might do that. Might write about it or put another word into it outside of this podcast. But we talk about a lot of things on the podcast. We talk about how to handle success. We talk about how to handle failure. We talk about struggle. We talk about, sports, how to handle your kids' successes and failures, how to handle your own, how to handle a lot of things when it comes to sports and life. But I think there's a concept out there that we haven't really touched on yet, in a way, and there's I would say at times in life, as human beings, all of us experience at one time or another this feeling of what I would call ultimate failure, or ultimate loss. And it's the type of event that really, really breaks us down and leaves us in this almost hopeless state of not knowing, how we're going to move forward. And I feel like a lot of people's dealing with that right now. And I feel like it's something that has been growing in our society for a while. And I think with the situation we're living in now with COVID, a lot of people have been actually compelled to feel that way in a certain way. And, what I would like to talk about is just that. What do you do? How do you handle, or at least what should your mindset be when you get to a point to where something really bad has happened to you? You've lost something, you've lost someone in your life, you've made a horrible mistake, and this sports and sports in general imitate life in that way, and that in any game that you're in, you can make a big mistake. I was just watching I know you were watching it too, the Packers Colts game. Yeah. And one of the Packers receivers, they're driving, they have all the momentum. They went on a 95-yard drive to send the game into overtime, and they're driving again, and one of the Packers receivers fumbled the football.
Yeah, they have the first possession of overtime, and they fumbled it in their own territory. Yeah.
And it was odd because, as the Colts are lining up to kick the winning field goal, this receiver's over on the sideline, just absolutely destroyed. And he's got his head down, and you kind of feel bad for him because he's going through a bad moment there. And probably in that moment for him, he feels like, he couldn't be any lower. He couldn't have made a bigger mistake than what he did. I kind of experienced this weekend too with my younger son's basketball team. They went 21-0 last year. 21-0, never lost a game. Had a lot of success, beat some really good teams, and they played in a tournament this weekend and went 1-3. Lost one game by 40, and the last game they played, they lost by 30.
They had the old humbling experience.
Absolutely, right? And so, I'm thinking, well, these kids probably feel about as low as they can feel right now. They probably don't know what's going to happen. Probably not. Maybe the parents feel that way. The kids are probably thinking about, when they left the court, they're probably thinking about getting home and playing Xbox, really. But we want to know the truth. But just that being an example of the way, in sports we can have that moment, and it happens in a lot more important and a lot deeper things in life. And I want to bring up a couple of those examples that I know, and I'll just kind of mention them because you have a story that you want to tell that's significant to the topic. But just point out, there's this girl out there named Bethany Hamilton that was a professional surfer, and when she was 13 years old, she was attacked by a shark, and her actually lost her left arm. They told her, she wasn't going to surf again, but several surgeries later, a specialized surfboard, and a lot of effort and hard work, she's surfing again. So I can just think about how this 13-year-old girl felt when she probably woke up in the hospital and she didn't have her left arm. I mean, how devastating that must have been.
The initial thought is it's over.
Yes,
it'll never be the same again. I'll never be able to do this again. You go immediately to the worst thoughts that you can imagine.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And there's another girl here that I know a little bit about her story. Her name's Dawn Logan. She's actually a Harvard student, but what happened to her in high school, she was a straight A student, and she was left homeless her senior year. Her parents were drug abusers, unfortunately, and they abandoned her. And I just think, man, how tough that must have been as as a senior in high school to have your parents abandon you, and she didn't let it keep her down. She ended up getting a full scholarship to Harvard and going to Harvard. So, in that moment of losing your parents in that situation, how big of a disappointment, how big of a heartache, how big of a challenge you must have, this girl must have saw in her life that kind of would have put her in a situation that, a lot of people would think there's no coming back from this. And then the other one I would like to mention is a guy named Kyle Maynard. Kyle Maynard was born with his condition. It was a condition known as congenital amputation, and didn't have any arms or legs, basically.
Congenital.
Genital amputation.
Was he born that way?
Yes.
That's what that means?
Yep.
Wow.
And he was the first quadruple amputee to ascend Mount Kilimanjaro without any prosthetics. He taped pieces of bicycle tire to the ends of his limbs so it would protect his limbs as he scaled the mountain. Isn't that a great story?
Incredible.
Unbelievable. But here, this is a guy that, as a kid, he's different from the other people. He knows he's at a disadvantage. He knows he can't walk, he can't use his arms, and he doesn't let it keep him down. But Coach, you've got a story that you want to share with us about an individual named Mario St. George Boyardi.
I do. First,
and I'm gonna pass that off to you.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to share this, and I think we can. When I was thinking about this story and I was thinking about some of the application of it, I really think, Pat, that we could do an entire series of podcasts as a follow-up to this. We'll have to talk about it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You and I have to talk about it off the air, but, there
we'll
are
see
lots,
how many people listen to this one.
I guess so. There are lots of ways that this experience can take place in our lives. This disorienting and asking ourselves, where do I go now? What this helplessness feeling. You had mentioned some scenarios, all of which are pretty much out of our control, I should say. But you mentioned some scenarios where things were happening that are completely outside of the realm of any possibility of control, like kids who have had parents leave them or some, incredible tragedies. And then you have somewhere, if they occur within like the game or the sport that you're playing. For example, this afternoon, Joe Burrow, for example, for the Cincinnati Bengals, we were watching the game, and he drops back to make a pass, and next thing you see is him wrenching and writhing in pain on the ground, and then you see a replay, and his knee bent the wrong way, about 45-degree angle. Actually, I saw a closer view of it, and it actually went to the side, where it was confirmed just from feeling it. I think you can get in there and feel around. You can tell if the ACL is torn. Orthopedic surgeons can, and then they're working on an MRI. Of course, by the time people listen to this, we'll have the full diagnosis, I'm sure, and the plan for his road back. But you see the pictures of athletes and on their faces, and we know how sick we feel when we watch that happen as fans, as people who are rooting for the player. And it makes you want to throw up to think, oh my gosh, this person who brings us so much joy every week, that this is you feel like you're part of their life, but then how much worse is it occurring in their heart and in their mind, as well. And those thoughts of, and I know I see it in high school students that I've coached, high school players and student athletes that I've coached. You see it in these college students that I'm close to here at Ohio University. A lot of them have gone through injuries. Right now there's a good friend of ours that goes to our church. He just recently had surgery, and he's out for this year, and he's already dealt with one injury in his college career. And you hear the pain in their voices because they just feel like in the moment they're never going to come back. I've seen Brock walk through injury, just different irritating things that he's dealt with in his wrist, and he had to get surgery last summer, and sometimes having to play through it and just thinking, gosh, am I ever going to feel normal again? Is there ever going to? How can I respond to this kind of stuff? And I think those are some of the real common ones that we experience in sports. And I think if we had the ability to step back and get a perspective that is much larger than where we are right now, we tend to look at life in a microscope focus, a micro focus as opposed to a macro focus. And I think if we were able to somehow step back and look at the big picture of what it's going to look like, and it's just amazing, not an hour after that happened with Joe, he gets on there and tweet. Did you see what he tweeted?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, he says, "Hey, thanks for the prayers. You can't get rid of me that easily. I'll see you next year."
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, and I know that mindset. To him, the mindset is, well, it's a different kind of work, but tomorrow when I wake up, I got to get to work.
Yeah.
I got to get to work. And yeah, it's a tough thing. What do you do?
Yeah. I think there's you're right. We could probably talk about this in a bunch of different ways, because there's some important factors that decide which direction you go with that, and who Joe Burrow is. I wasn't surprised in that response, to be honest with you. Yeah. So, I'll definitely be rooting for him.
George Boiardi played lacrosse for Cornell University in the Ivy League in the mid-2000s. And his story, I'm going to paraphrase it tremendously here, but I want to tell it through the lens of his coach, his lacrosse coach, whose name is Jeff Tambroni. He talked about how he remembered this recruit that they brought in his freshman year named Mario St. George Boiardi. It's a family name, but he always went by George. And he said he can still remember the first time the coaching staff looked at him as he was walking out there on the sidelines when they were recruiting him, and there's like this guy, he just looked like a fierce warrior. He was just chiseled. He wasn't a big bulky guy, but he was tall and athletic, and he was fit, and he just had this warrior spirit about him. And everything he did it at max effort. And that was there. And so they saw him. It's like, this is the kind of player we want. This is the kind of player we need on our team. And so when the staff went to meet him, they immediately were surprised at how his demeanor didn't match the look. They thought this guy's going to have sort of some rough edges. But they said he was really kind of quiet, really soft-spoken, very, very humble. And they found out after bringing him on campus and bringing him onto their team that he was an incredible leader, but his leadership was that of, it was kind of silent. He led by example, and he just kind of garnered this respect from his teammates that it was hard to describe. And they said that he had this paperweight that he kept on his desk, and it had a quote on it. It was given to him by his father, who he's named after, Mario. And the quote was from Benjamin Franklin, and it said, "Well done is better than well said." And that's something I hear Jocko Willink say a lot. In fact, I think it might be a chapter in his book, Extreme Ownership. Well done is better than well said. Well, they said that as a freshman, no one worked harder in the weight room than George. No one ran harder during conditioning drills than George. Everything he did was absolutely to the best of his ability. He was one of the most competitive players they had ever seen. But the cool thing was he wasn't driven by the need to be better than everybody else. He just wanted to be the best he could be, and he was just always driven to improve every single day. And so they said that, they could tell that this was a guy. I guess I don't know anything at all about lacrosse, but I guess there's like he played defense, and they're like the defend, like people who play lacrosse. I guess you have different size sticks and things like that you play with. You have like medium size short sticks and long sticks and things like that. And I guess he was a midfielder with a long stick, and the coaching staff came to him in the middle of the season, and they asked George to switch from being a long stick defensive midfielder to a short stick defensive midfielder, because they already had another player, an upperclassman, who was one of the best long stick midfielders in the country, and they wanted George to be on the field. And so he said that they're always concerned about asking somebody to change positions, because we kind of get locked into our certain positions, right? Everybody does. And they said that it was not even It was not even a consideration in his mind. I mean, to balk at it, to question it, he was like, "Sure, coach, whatever you need, whatever you need." And they said this wasn't going to be an easy transition to make. I mean, it required a completely different set of skills and stick skills and maneuvers and things like that. It was going to be pretty challenging. But they said when they asked George to switch, he never complained. Instead, he just said, "Okay, I got to get to work then." And he practiced extra. He spent a lot of extra time working on the different skills and the drills and things like that to get better. And he just focused on improving. And they said it's just throughout his entire college career, this is what kind of player he was. There was just no pretense about him. He was who he was. He was humble. He was sincere. He was joyful. He was completely selfless. He was compassionate. And this is just who he was in general life, like as a student, but as an athlete, he had the same exact persona. He always stood up for those who wouldn't stand up for themselves. If somebody was teasing a younger teammate or someone who was a little weaker, he had a way of telling people to knock it off, but even doing so in a way that doesn't make anybody feel bad about it. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, okay, all right, George. Just like there was just this. There was this respect about him that was evident all the time.
He was a leader.
Yeah. So you say that to get an idea. You give that background to get an idea of the kind of player you're talking about. Well, now you fast forward to, I think it was his junior or senior season, right around 2007. The coach said it was in the second game of the season. Their team had suffered a really embarrassing loss to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., which is actually George's hometown. So it was in front of his friends and family. And they said he was really upset about this because the way the team played. And he took all those things personally. The way the team played, he always took personally. And so he said, guys, we got to fix this. And so they went out and they played Stony Brook the next game. And they won, but they just barely beat them. And so they were still playing below their potential. And so George was just doing everything. He said he remembered George was doing everything he could in that game to just win it. He was relentless. He was stealing every ball that he could get from opposing players, picking up tons of loose balls and whatever. Whatever. I'm not even going to try lacrosse terminology.
You'd think I'd know more because Jim Brown was a great lacrosse player.
Yeah. But they were still playing below their potential. But they were winning, just not as much as they felt like they should. And so their next game was on a Wednesday night, and they said it was a really cold night. The team was playing below their potential again, and they should have been cruising on to victory, but they just weren't. In fact, they said by this time, the team that they were playing against, they should have been beating them by so much that all their subs should have been in the game, and George shouldn't even been on the field this time. But because the game was still close, he was out there, and they said he was out there playing as relentlessly as he always plays, trying to deliver, that win for the team. And the coach said this: our opponent had the ball on offense in a man-up situation as they looked for another opportunity to score and move one step closer to tying the game. They took a shot from about 15 yards out, but George jumped in front of the ball and blocked it with his chest. Then he took a few steps toward the sideline, staggered, and fell to the turf. Well, our athletic trainer, he said, ran out there immediately knowing that something was seriously wrong. And the athletic trainer performed CPR for several minutes until the ambulance came, took George to the hospital where they tried to resuscitate him without any success. He said it was the worst moment of his life, the coach said. It said about 90 minutes after George was taken off the field, the game was over there in the locker room. The coaching staff had received word from the hospital, official word that he had passed away. And he said after taking a few moments to himself, he called his parents. His parents actually were not at that game because it was a rescheduled game and they couldn't come. And then he went out to speak to the team. He said he walked in the locker room with tears already in his eyes. But then he had to step back into the coach's office because he couldn't compose himself. And he had to go in and compose himself before speaking to them. But he said he noticed that when he had done that, the team saw him, and they all burst into tears because they knew what the news was. He said they were in shock. They were in a lot of pain. Their captain, their teammate, their friend, the heart of their team was gone. And he said after that, they had to decide, what are we going to do with this season? So they actually had conversations. What do we do with that? Trying to answer that question that you posed to us here in this podcast. What next?
Sure.
What do we do?
Yeah. What next? Because at that moment, you use the words team. You use the word teammate and you use the word friend, and they're two different realms, but all the same.
Yeah.
And it's a devastating reality when you lose someone like that. And not only that, but you think about it from a personal perspective. You also think about it from a team perspective. You think about, how are we going to replace this guy?
Yeah.
And then you think about, it happening again.
The reality that could happen again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's rough, and you don't know where to go. You don't in the moment when you're as you're evaluating those things in your head, that is the question. Yeah. What's next? What's next after this horrible loss?
Yeah.
After this horrible event that we've all, experienced now and will experience, what do we do? It's a tough question to answer.
It is. And I think that would be, where I said that we could go a lot of directions and speak to the story a lot more in future episodes. I think that we could talk about some of the ways that people respond, particularly this team, and how they responded as well after this. One of the things that I didn't mention is that the team had created like a lot of teams do, they create a way to sort of reward certain players on a week-to-week basis based on their performance, based upon their work ethic. And some of them have like a lunch pail, and you can carry the lunch pail. Lots of football teams will carry the hammer, things like that. Well, they had a hard hat. And if you were the person that received the hard hat because of the way you worked, you would basically carry it around with you. It'd be you'd wear it to the field, and then it'd be with your stuff. They said it was hard to get the hard hat away from George on a weekly basis. That hard hat, everything that he was what they wanted the person who wore that hard hat every week to be. And so, to make a long story short, basically they dedicated this whole idea of the hard hat to him. From that point forward, they had a red hard hat with the number 21 on it, which was his number. And they came up with 21 ways, the number that George wore, 21 ways that he was a great teammate to them. So you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I do.
And we could do 21 podcasts on these things. I don't think we should do that many, but I'm telling you, it's an incredible, when you think about what it really means to be a great teammate and the example that this guy left behind for teams and players, it's a great legacy. It really is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think you could summarize it by saying that the key to the answer to the question of what's next is understanding and knowing that you have a purpose. Not everyone knows that purpose right off, but, it would be beneficial to find it. And I think that's what's baked into these types of things, like the example that you give there, the 21 ways and the way that they've figured out a way to honor George, going forward within the program, within the team. It's hard, man. It's hard. And when I think about this story, I think about, because in this situation the loss was a life.
Yeah.
It wasn't a game. It wasn't a a fumble. It wasn't a strikeout. It was a person. It was a friend. It was a son, and that's about as devastating as things get in this world. And it's not an easy answer. It's really tough. But I know that when I think about it, I think about his parents, and I think about those friends, and I recognize that in that moment there's a lot of hopelessness and there's a lot of uncertainty, and I correlate that with the situation that a lot of people find themselves in now. I correlate it with earlier today. I correlated it with the way I assumed Joe felt when he was laying on the field. They said they could think so. One of his teammates said that they could hear him screaming.
Yeah, I think Chase Young said that.
That's right. Chase Young said,
and then a teammate of his. Yeah.
Who is a teammate? Yeah, exactly. It was a teammate. Actually, was in on the hit that caused the injury. So that when it's just that devastating feeling. You're right. Sick to our stomach. That's kind of how I felt too. And everyone knows I'm a Browns fan, but everyone also knows Joe Burrow. What his impact is and what his association with Southeastern Ohio. And there's a lot of kids in this area that are tied to Joe Burrow. I can tell you that. There's a lot of people looking up to him and counting on him and rooting for him to do great things. And that alone makes him important to me. Yeah, go ahead.
He will.
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing.
He will.
I want to say that because why he will. He will because he knows what his purpose is. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. He lives that, and he's been living that for a long time. And it's a key, because when that moment happens, when that failure happens, when that loss happens, or when that huge personal mistake, people make mistakes too in life that they don't feel like they can come back from. Right. And when those things happen, we still, if we have that purpose, if we're grounded, we know that the thing to do is just continue on. Right. In a lot of different ways. I think that's why it's so important to have an amount of faith. And you and I are Christians. We don't necessarily make this a faith podcast, but I think a lot of the topics that we have are enshrined in the faith that we have in our God and the principles that we take from the Bible.
Yeah, it's impossible to not, when it's a life.
Sure,
it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not a compartmentalized. It's not like, well, now we're talking about this and now we're talking about that. Well, no, it's who I am. So it's impossible to not have the flavor of this podcast come out, which is we are people of faith.
Yeah, and I would just say this too, that the principles in the Bible are so great that you actually don't have to be a believer, a literal believer of the words to take a lesson from it and understand the foundation that's being presented. The portrait of Jesus is greatness.
Yeah.
And regardless of where you stand on that side of the spectrum, you can take a lot away from the words of Jesus Christ. There's no doubt about that. But, I would point to what Paul says in Romans, and that is that he basically says that when we suffer, that suffering produces endurance, and that endurance produces character, and the character produces hope. So we should rejoice in the sufferings that we have. That's a purpose there. That's a purpose-driven statement. We understand that these things bring us to that hope. And of course, our hope is in God. And as you opened the podcast, pretty much, God supersedes all things that we experience on this earth. So, there really is nothing to fear when you're anchored in that principle. But understanding the purpose and understanding that each day, each moment, each challenge that you go through is just that. It's just a moment, and you can come back from these things. You can come back from the devastating losses, the devastating injuries, the devastating mistakes. People do, they do all the time. We have those stories. That's, as human beings, we're built to be resilient in that way, that we can overcome these things that are so devastating and so painful, both mentally and physically to us. We're strong enough to do that.
Absolutely, we are. I'll give you another biblical principle here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Jesus said, "Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life?" And, he's talking about how basically, worrying does us no good. Because that's what's happening in those moments, right? We're worried. We want to go backwards in time. We can't. No one has a time machine. We can't go back and get what just happened. We want to. We're devastated. We want to be able to go back, rewind the clock, and make it different, but we can't. And so what do? Well, we worry about it. Well, what are we really worrying about? Well, what's going to happen now? What am I not going to be able to do now? How am I going to move on from here, right? And the principle here, the point is that not a single one of us, what we're doing when we're worrying is we're trying to add something to our lives that we can't add. It is impossible. We can't do it. And so basically he goes on to say, that there's two ways to live. Basically, you can worry about everything, and if you're worried about everything, then you're going to be in charge of having to figure out everything. But if you don't worry, if you place your trust in something higher than yourself, you place your trust in the one who created you, then you don't have to worry.
Yeah,
you don't have to worry. He actually says it: seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has enough worry for itself. Or, each day has enough trouble of its own. I'm botching that all up, but but that's kind of a paraphrase of what he's saying there. And in the book of Matthew, it's also recorded in the book of Luke. But there's just an example of how, this isn't a Christian podcast, a faith-based podcast, but a lot of the principles that you folks hear Pat and I talk about, this is where it's coming from. We got to be really honest with you. It's where it's coming from. It's coming from the Scripture and what we have put our lives into, and it's how we coach as well. I'm not saying it's how we coach in terms of, we're always quoting Scripture to our kids, because honestly, I don't do that. But it's how we, in how you live and the decisions you make. And when you give kids perspective to say, look, there's no reason to worry. I have said to kids before, hey, look, you don't have a time machine. You can't turn back. You can't turn back the clock. You can't go back. So it does us no good to worry about it. We got to move forward. We got to move on. We got to figure out, okay, what am I going to do now? Because everything, every day and every moment has enough worry for itself. It doesn't need us to worry for it. We're not going to add anything to our lives or to the moment by worrying. So we got to let that go. Just let it go.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny because we talk about worrying because worrying in itself doesn't change anything. And I think the odd part about that is by choosing not to worry, you're kind of taking the situation into your own hands. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So basically, in a way, we can't change what happened before, right? We can't. We don't have the power to change the story up to this point, but we do decide how the story, and maybe in a smaller scale, the chapter of the story that we're in, we can decide how that's going to end.
Yeah, you have influence over the outcome for sure.
Yeah, and what there's no, I think retribution, or everyone always talks about the comeback player of the year, which I in all sports they talk about that, and I've got that one earmarked for next year. But we love a comeback story, right?
Yeah.
Naturally, everyone loves a comeback story. They love when people come back from the depths to make a difference. And when things go wrong in life, when you hit that, when you feel like you don't know what to do, or there is no hope. There's one thing that moment brings, and there's more than one thing, but there's at least one thing that it brings, and that's the fact that you've went through it, so you deserve to know the satisfaction of feeling that you've overcome it, that you've came back and emerged victorious over the challenge or the situation that you found yourself in. So yes. I think there's a huge need in our society right now. I know locally there's a huge need for our kids and our the citizens of our area to hear that we're going to come out of this. Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to be okay.
That's regionally, nationally, globally.
Yeah,
it needs to be heard everywhere.
And I don't think it's just COVID related. I'm not just talking coronavirus.
I know.
So
yeah,
but I hope that we can do that. I hope that we can play a part in kind of bringing that sense of control, bringing that sense of purpose in some way to those that listen to us on a daily basis, or maybe our listeners know someone that's struggling a little bit, and they can send what we're talking about to somebody that needs to hear it. And as always, reach out to us if you want to talk about it, even if you think we're absolutely idiotic in what we're saying, and you want us to tell us so. Go ahead and do that, because if you're hurting and you're uncertain, you're not alone. Mm-hmm. You're not alone, but you're not too far gone either.
Right.
So
you're not always going to have control over the things that come to you. We know that. We've experienced that. Every one of us do every single day. And we say this a lot. This principle is something that we should just all keep so near and dear to in our minds and to our hearts. And if you have to, write it down, put it all over your walls, in Post-it notes, in your mirrors, whatever it takes, in your books. And that is the old formula: E plus R equals O is relevant here, right? Events plus response equals outcome. And what that equation means in our lives is events come at us all the time, and we don't get to choose what events are thrown at us. Sometimes we can. Sometimes we choose them by our behaviors and our actions and our decisions and our choices. But most of the time, we don't get to choose events and circumstances that we find ourselves in. And that means there's an outcome that's going to take place whenever something comes at us. There's a certain outcome that's going to happen. The outcome is not the event. We got to remember that. That is not the outcome. The event that you're experiencing right now does not have to be the outcome. The important part of this formula, the most important part of this formula, is that R. And that R factor is your response. And your response changes everything.
Absolutely. It's the only thing we can control.
It's what you can control. You actually have influence over that outcome based on what your response is. And you got to believe that.
You say that sometimes our actions cause us to be put in situations. Those actions are responses to the situation that we're in, or the event, that we're experiencing, right? So no matter what, we're acting out on something. We're acting in a moment, in a circumstance, in a situation. We control that response. At some point, even if you're in a situation where you could argue that you don't control the response anymore, at some point you did to get there, right?
Sure.
So
and the reality is, I would argue that. I would argue that vehemently, because I don't care what situation you're in. Unless you're dead, Unless your brain is turned off, you always control your response. You're always in control of how you perceive what is happening. And that's the biggest problem with a lot of issues that we face. Ryan Holiday talks about it in The Obstacle is the Way. The first thing that happens is there is the event and there's how we perceive the event. And a lot of times we respond based on how we perceive the event, and that causes us to respond negatively. The fact is, we got to remove ourselves from our perceptions sometimes and see the event for what it really is. If you've just been injured, hey, it's not the end of the world. That's the way I'm perceiving it right now. But the fact is, a lot of good athletes have come back from a torn ACL. I can do it too. I can't do it today. I can't do it tomorrow. I got to have the long view in mind. I got to have patience. I got to have persistence. I got to be resilient. And that's what I'm going to do. And that's going to be my response. Okay, get to work. That's how you can say, all right, I'll see you next year. Get to work.
Good word. Good word.
Well, buddy, my battery's about dying here. I'm talking to you.
We better call her an evening.
So what do you think? Do you want to, is this a to be continued?
Yeah, we'll work up something.
I think it's going to be a good to be continued. I really do.
We don't run into this situation very often, so we'll run with it.
Yes.
Unless there's only like 3 listeners for this by Wednesday, and then maybe we'll go in a different direction. But
if we get emails and text messages saying, "Oh, this was horrible. You guys need to change direction." Yeah,
a bunch of I hate your cult.
Hey, listen, it's our podcast. We can talk about whatever we want.
I think at this point we have a loyal fan base that's gonna let us give them some bad content every once in a while. Anyway, so
I'll say this. I'll say this by way of teaser. Okay,
here we go.
What I have in mind is to give people a list, an actionable list of ways that they can be a really great teammate. We'll use George Boyardi's life and his example to draw out ways that your kids, mom, dad, can be great teammates. And I'll give you a little hint. I'll give you a little secret too. A lot of these, a good bit of these, include you as well. They include all of us. They include coaches. They include families, parents, but they most assuredly include the kids, the players. And so it's extremely relevant to our Coaching Life podcast and what we talk about in sports. But of course, being a good teammate is a life issue as well. It's a life concept as well. Because these are things that you'll carry with you for the rest of your life.
Sounds great. Absolutely. And looking forward to that. Good deal. Good stuff, as the guys on the Coaching Life podcast will say.
Yes.
Good talking to you, Coach.
Yeah, buddy.
See you, brother.